Jose, welcome back to the Gnostic Media Podcast. It's been, what, about a year since you were on last?
Around a year, yes. How are you?
I'm doing quite well, and the reason why I wanted to have you back is you had sent me a video that you had done recently from someone who had seen you on my show last time, and they wanted you on to do a presentation, which then I saw of you, and it's a subject that I started piecing together in my first book, Astrotheology and Shamanism, and I didn't quite get it uh, how it all fit together. And when I saw your presentation the other day, or a couple of weeks ago, it was one of those, oh geez, of course that's what it is. And so, wanted to have you back on, but before we go into that, why don't we talk about your recent experience? And you know what? Your video appears to be have just frozen.
Is it frozen now?
But and I was just saying that recently you were in Ecuador, and you went to and you actually you moved from New York back to South America, and you're in living in Brazil now. But you were just in Ecuador, and you went to see a shaman there, and you were just about to talk about that experience. Would you like to go into that?
Yeah, no problem. So I went to this guy. He was a healer in a little town in the coast of Ecuador with my brother-in-law, and it was a fascinating experience. So the guy basically he gave me a foot massage, and he said that he was basically aligning my chakras as he was doing this. And he started to tell me things about my life and that he could sense that, I guess. And he said that he was able to talk to spirits. And it was a fascinating, a traumatic experience to say the least, right? I think it's trauma based what they do. First of all, the pain in my feet was unbearable. And then at the end of the thing, he said that he wanted to do some cleaning on me. So he asked me to go to this room where I got all naked, and I had to take this mental thing and rub it on my body, right? And it was an incredible 20-minute experience of intense heat and cold. So it was a shocking, traumatic experience. Uh, and thinking in retrospective, right, what happened is that it's a beautiful way of doing things, what they do, because basically what they're doing is they're imprinting in your body, in your whole body, right, ideas and notions and emotions, and you're associating that in your subconscious with pain and with these intense experiences, right? So it gets embedded in you what is happening. And at the end of the day, what they do is they tap into your fears, right, and your pains and all these things, and they create a problem and they offer the solution to the problem as well.
So
So what they're
they're doing literally a Hegelian dialectic.
exactly, and they're creating this closed circle where they're creating an addiction because what they're doing is they're giving you fear, and they're saying, and this fear that you have that you didn't know, right? Because the spirits that I see around me are telling me that you have this problem. I have the solution for you. So we can do another session, right? And I can solve that problem. And I bet they're gonna find more problems at that time. And then every time you have to give them money, right? So it's a
Interesting.
beautiful way to work. It's very, very interesting. Now I don't know if this guy saw spirits or what the hell he saw, but the way I
Now
see it,
you've done ayahuasca before, right?
yes,
And
I've done it
did you
once.
see spirits on ayahuasca?
I did see spirits, yes.
And I've done ayahuasca a number of times myself, and I've certainly seen things that I think with the deeper into the experience that you go, they're probably reflections of different aspects or things within ourselves that we haven't dealt with, rather than actual external spirits. But anyway, that's just years of looking at this issue, and then I recently did an interview with Martin Ball, and he's got a new novel out called Beyond Azra that goes into a lot of this topic and raises some important issues there, I think. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, right? Is Are you looking inside you, or are you
Right,
projecting
and
yourself outside?
exactly, and how do you and see, with in 5 sense reality, there's no way that you can verify these spirits, and they only happen under the influence. I mean, and I shouldn't say only under the influence of ayahuasca or mushrooms and things like this, but it typically happens under those types of scenarios. And I'm not saying that it's not possible that those worlds exist or not, vast face and small face and the Kabbalah and whatnot, but of course, the onus of proof is always on yourself before you say that those things are real to anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what is interesting, right, is that what is real at the end of the day, because when you're high, or when you're in the presence of them, they're as real as anything else in your life, right?
Right, but
uh,
well, and that's the thing is again we and you're aware of the trivium and the quadrivium and all of this, and you've studied it for a long time, so you're aware of how to verify things in 5 sense reality.
Absolutely. The problem is that we're not only 5 sense reality, right? When you go to the psychological realm, you're more than your 5 senses, because you're your emotions and your fears and your passions and all this. And this is not a 5 sense thing, right? So when you ascribe reality only to the 5 sense reality, then you're leaving aside a big part of what you are. So
And well, so what? But what is outside of that is what is outside of language, essentially. With
exactly.
and so it's what we can't identify, but
But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist,
it
right?
doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't exist. But as you just pointed out, is this something that we're experiencing internally, like a hallucination, or is it really external?
Right.
And
At the end of the day, it
until
doesn't matter, right?
and that's where the onus of proof comes in, because until you can express those things that exist or don't outside of language, do they exist is what it really comes down to, outside of language, and if they do, then how do we express them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking the other day about this this fascinating thought. And imagine that you're dying, right? And you heard a lot of people, I don't know if it happens because I never died, so, or not that I'm aware of, but that you go through the tunnel and then you see all these spirits and all these things while you're dying, right? All these before or after death experiences that people have.
Sure.
And imagine that is the same kind of thing that happens when you're in ayahuasca, and the spirits that you see there are quite real, right? So at the end of the day, and when the shamans talk about the spirits that you see, they're talking about your ancestors. So it's all your family members, and or
Sure.
you could see it as all the inherited things, and all
But
the problems of
we
your family.
also have to be very careful with that. I mean, when a shaman, see, and I've studied, as you know, shamanism for many, many years,
Hmm.
and we've exposed the dark shamanism, and you said that you felt like this guy that you saw in Ecuador was a dark shaman,
Hmm.
and and we've exposed a lot of how the mind control works and how the shaman became the priest, became the king, became the president, etc., and that whole line of thinking, and the recent material that I've been putting out from the various universities showing that Gordon Wasson was CIA, and that a very large part of the psychedelic movement was intentionally launched without critical thinking to
Hmm.
misguide people. So, being that all of these aspects are there, how do you think? What do you think is the proper way to navigate the typical shaman figure who becomes this priest king guy? the
Mm-hmm.
ultimate appeal to authority and using his secret knowledge of occultation against the rest of the group versus an actual spiritual knowledge.
Well, I think it's all the same, right? So is knowledge at the end of the day, I think is a tool, right? And it has no value of judgment, right? Is neutral. So dynamite, I can use it to build roads or go into mines, or I can use it to
Right.
blow people. So, and I think it's different shades of the same thing. One interesting thing, right, and is the gods. If you think about the gods of antiquity, they were not good or evil. That's something that we ascribe to in Manichaeism, right, and in Judeo-Christianism to these entities where they're either good or evil. But the Greek gods, they were both, right? Like if you think about Zeus, he was a nasty guy, right? He used to go around raping women and he had all these bad or all these emotions, right? Like uncontrolled
Right.
emotions on one side, but on the other side he was just. And so they had this dichotomy because they were projections of you, and you're not good or evil, you're just, you have aspects. So I think it's the same thing with this, right? Like we
Yeah, and that's
humans.
that's and that's what I was saying a minute ago with the spirits is that
Mhm,
they seem to be different aspects of ourselves.
absolutely.
Because the further you go into them, the more these spirits disappear and become a reflection of you.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's what you are, right?
But
You're a bunch.
I suppose at this point it's all speculation.
Absolutely. We'll see when we die what happens, or we don't, right? Now, to close my thought, what I was telling you about the tunnel, the white tunnel, and I don't know if it happens, but let's suppose for a second that that happens. Then what is beautiful and poetic about death, right? And let's say that you're visiting your ancestors, as the shamans say. So as you're dying, the last experience that you have is that all your ancestors show up in a white tunnel and welcome you. And that's the last point of consciousness that you have before everything ends, right? So, in a way, it's quite literal that this thing happened, right? Because it happened to you, it's your last subjective experience, but it's the last experience you had, and real, nevertheless, to you. So I find that quite poetic and interesting.
All right. Well, the reason why I wanted to have you on the show today, like I said, is this presentation that you did, and I haven't given away what it was about yet.
Hmm.
And well, let's get into spelling today. And this isn't going to be the trivium, quadrivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric type of spelling. This is going to be, the ancient form of spelling or casting a spell. And so let's first off, how did you get into researching spelling?
Uh, well, I'm trying to understand the nature of reality and how things work, and the nature of society and the behavior of people and why people believe in what they believe. So I went straight to start studying things like the state and see that is superstitious, right? It's a superstition, and people believing things are not there. And I saw that when you start looking at that and you look at society.
Such as Larkin Rose, who you and I met
Exactly,
at Philly in
exactly,
Philly at the Free Your Mind conference, and
exactly. So the idea is, why do people believe in such things? And then I went to look at magic, right? And how people believe in spirits or different things, and why do they believe on that? And as soon as you start doing that and you start studying the nature of magic, and basically the, the core of the presentation is that our society is founded in magic, that and there are
indeed it
certain
is.
and there are attributes in society that are magical, right? when the president goes and passes a law that says, and he writes on a paper somewhere, and he says, "Oh, I don't know, there should be no more poverty in the world," and he signs that. If you think about it, that's a magical act. What he's doing is, I wish
and
that this
not an,
happens.
and let's define magical so that it's not an equivocation. We're not talking about a magical as in some people will interpret it as beautiful. It would
Right,
be magical as in these politicians write something down and do a little ritual
right,
and it manifests into reality. In other
into
words,
reality.
it's magic.
Exactly. And the problem is that it works because you see when people believe in the act, right? It's just like when you have a magician on a stage and he pulls a rabbit out of the hat, and you presence that, and if you want to believe in it, you believe it. And if you don't know that there is a hole on the hat, then you quite sense that something was not right, but 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 it happened. So unless you know how magic works, then magic is real to you.
Sure.
And when people get fooled with these things, they modify their behavior, and as they modify their behavior, that's a manifestation in reality of the spell.
Sure. Well, you know, it's
So
interesting. I did a radio interview recently with these guys who thought they were being clever, and one of them was into studying the Kabbalah and knew all about spelling,
mhm,
and so he was playing some games during the interview, and I just called him out on the spelling, and I mentioned that I had into it back in my first book, and that you had just exposed a whole thing on spelling,
mhm.
and that I wasn't willing to play the game, that I knew how it worked, and and the guy was just kind of taken aback because not too many people seem to know what spelling really is. So I think it's a highly important topic for people to get what magic and what spelling really are and how it works and how it is all essentially mind control.
Yeah, absolutely. So you want me to start with this?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's cross the fingers and see if it works. Okay, perfect. So what we're going to talk about today is how society is based on magic. And in order to do this, what I want to do, right, is I want to go back to this was the first person that we introduced in the previous, or the first entity that we introduced in the previous presentation, who is Hermes. And Hermes was the god of magic at the end of the day, and all the hermetical arts, hence Hermes, hermetical. Uh, and he was known in by the Romans as Mercury, and by the Egyptians as Thoth. Now, what is interesting about this guy is that he's the personification at the end of the day of imagination. And basically, what he was the messenger of the gods. So everything that is related to language and symbols and communications is related to Hermes. And if you see the attributes of Hermes, just to recap from the last time, right? He was the god of knowledge, of understanding, of magic, of language, of thieves, of commerce, of banking, of the shepherds, of astrology, of numbers, of geometry, of medicine, of invention, of theology, of government in the sense of coding laws, of the alphabet, of civilization in general, right? Because our civilization is based on this, on all these codes and conventions that we have that are end up being incarnated or presented as symbols. So that's the main figure or the representation of what we're talking about. And if you see is all these things together, so we're talking about government and language and commerce and money and thieves and communications and symbols and magic, and everything is together. and we'll see how it works. Now, during when Alexander the Great decided to colonize the Middle East, and he ended up in Egypt, uh, there was a big influx and mixing of ideas between the Greeks and the Egyptians. And then you have all the conquer of Egypt and all the Hellenization of Egypt. And the god Thoth, who was the god of magic in Egypt, was taken or renamed by the Greeks as Hermes. And then the city dedicated to Thoth was renamed to Hermopolis. And these are two representations in Egypt of the god Hermes. One was an ibis, and the other one was a baboon. So in Egypt, every time you see one sculpture, a sculpture of an ibis or a baboon, you're talking about Hermes. Now, let's go to magic and what magic is. So before we start there, I want to talk to you a little bit about the way I like to, or the way I proceed with my research. So I start with grammar, basically, and it's very simple. I just go and say, with no preconceptions, what is this? And I take whatever is the topic or the subject that I want to study, and I go and read what it is, and I get the definitions. Now, what is interesting is that we're talking about language, and what we're doing is we're doing an inquiry into language. And words are fascinating because they're magical. And let's talk. And in this time, right, as in wonderful, magical as in wonderful, and it's probably the only time that I'm gonna use magic in that sense in this presentation.
And
And
let me just interrupt you real quick. I should also point out that up above there it says of the Magi, and Oxford defines Magi as a member of the ancient Persian priestly caste. And so and also the Magi were often the astronomers. So I just wanted to throw that in.
right, that's on the next slide. So let me go back and we'll go there. Yes. Uh, so basically, uh, and before we go into the definition of magic, right? When you study language and when you study words and when you study the etymology of words, it's like doing paleontology because you see all the knowledge that we have around us, all history and all the books and all these things that we have around us are written with an agenda and with a purpose. And usually, the winners write history, right? So if we really want to know what happened, it's pretty much distorted by the biases and the conflicts of interest and of the narrators of history. But there is one thing that they cannot change because it's organic and it's part of us and it's language. So words are like little bones of dinosaurs that we can go and unearth and examine. And what we find there is the history of what things are because they're encoded in the etymology of the words, in the roots of the words. So it's a fascinating way to go and look at reality, right, and language, because it tells you what happened in the past, what people believe, and the preconceptions and the ideas and the environment of the past, and it's encoded in the words. So that's something that is fascinating, and I find that beautiful, and it's very poetic, and I love to do that when I'm studying and doing research. I just do my grammar and I go and look at the words and what they are and where they come from, and they're very revealing because they tell you a lot of things. So let's go to the definition of magic, right? So comes from the Greek at the end, magus, which, as you said, is of the magi. And here's the definition: any supposed supernatural art, especially the pretended art of controlling the actions of spiritual or supernatural beings. Now,
Now,
if you see, yeah, go ahead.
let me ask you now. You just hit on a key thing, and watch, I'm probably giving away the next slide too.
Yeah,
But a spiritual being can also be a human being, so it's the control of spiritual beings.
right. So you see, because spiritual beings, what does that mean, right? And then there are two things here. One that I want to show is that I put in italics the word supposed, because you see in the definition of magic in the dictionary, you are supposed to be getting is what the word is, but in reality what you're getting is the view or the point of view of the person who wrote the dictionary. So
Indeed.
so what you can see here, right, is that they're presuming that supernatural things do not exist, and then there is a bias in the definition of the word.
Well, but
So
let me just interject here real quick.
right.
Oxford says on the word for definition 1A of the word spirit, and this
Hmm.
is from the Oxford English Dictionary, the full version, the animating or vital principle in man and animals, that which gives life to the physical organism, in contrast to its purely material elements, the breath of life.
Yeah, beautiful, right? Because what you can be talking about when you talk about spiritual is aspects of the mind,
Or just life itself in general,
right?
because as this points out, it's the animating principle in man and animals. So to have mind in animal, I suppose that would be another push.
Yeah, fascinating is all this, and the more you read this, it's beautiful because
Sure.
it's just like this huge labyrinth of concepts, and as you start going, you start seeing relations to things everywhere. So it's very, very interesting. So as we saw, it comes from the Magi, and then as you were mentioning, right? So we have the Magus or the Magi, which comes from the Latin word magnus, which means great. And then at the end of the day, let's read the first one is one of the members of the learned and priestly caste in ancient Persia, who had official charge of the sacred rites, practiced interpretation of dreams, professed supernatural arts, and were distinguished by peculiarities of dress and insignia. And then the second one there is in Christian history, one of the wise men who, according to the Gospel of Matthew, came from the east to Jerusalem to do homage to the newborn King of the Jews. So, three things here that I find interesting. One is the root of Magnus, and we'll see why. Then the second one, Magi, or Magus, is simply a denotation of a member of a caste, right? A
and
priest.
and I've got another one for you. Uh,
Uh-huh.
the mage, MAGE, there, the Oxford English Dictionary defines as one, a magician, a person of exceptional wisdom and learning.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Exactly.
it refers back to magus.
Right. And you see here in the second in the second definition that I have here, it says wise man, right? So
Yep.
man of wisdom. We're going back to the same.
Yeah,
And
but
now,
but wise men, when we use it that way, I think it gets lost in the Christian idea of the three wise men. Whereas when you explain it as the definition of mage, a
uh-huh.
person of exceptional wisdom and learning,
Right.
then we have
I
a
think what it
real picture
means,
of what's going on here.
yeah, I think when you talk about a wise man, right, is someone who loves wisdom. And then there is another word for that, which is a philosopher, because philosophy is the love of wisdom.
Exactly.
So a man of wisdom is a philosopher. And usually the learned people were the high castes who controlled society in the past and even today. No?
Yep.
Now, this is another interesting word, which comes again from the same root, magnus, which is the root of magi, and is magister.
Yeah.
And from there, right, what you have is master, maestro, magistrate, magnitude, major, and mister. And
and
look at
that
the definition.
and that's just fascinating, and especially that one right there in the middle, magistrate, because now we're right back into government. And you
Exactly.
know what? I just wanted to point out here before we go into this further, take a step back here and point out the Oxford English Dictionary's bias. as you had pointed out a minute ago, and I have a perfect example here under Magus B, 1B,
Hmm.
apply, applied by Irish historians to the heathen sorcerers who opposed St. Patrick.
That's beautiful. But all that gives you information, right? Like the bias. It's like when you read the newspapers, which I never do. When I'm forced to, what I do is that the beauty of it is that the bias gives you information.
Exactly. It does. And when you know the trivium and when you know the fallacies, you can actually go through it and glean it, actually pull the information out of it as if it wasn't lying.
Right, exactly. So everything is out in the open for those who have eyes to see, which is an occult maxim at the end of the day, one of the things
Indeed.
that these magi's do. So let's look at the definition of magister here. A title of the Middle Ages given to a person in authority or to one having a license from a university to teach philosophy and the liberal arts.
Bum
And
bum
then,
bum.
exactly.
And for those
and,
who
the,
don't know, the liberal arts are the trivium and quadrivium.
and quadrivium. And then the second one here is the possessor of a master's degree. And then this takes you straight into masonry, right? Because all these initiatic occult sects that you know, and all these boys clubs, all of them have degrees, and they have the master's degree. So
The
it's very
master
interesting.
mason. Yeah.
Exactly, is the degree of the master mason,
Sure.
and
And of
which
course when you graduate, you wear the Masonic mortarboard on your head.
absolutely, absolutely, and we'll see that later on here. So here is the next image, and we're going back to Thoth and the priests and the priestly class of Egypt, where I think the high point in antiquity of these magi were these guys who were the scribes and the priests in the temples in Egypt. And as we were seeing before in in the definition of Hermes.
I lost you. Hello? Hello?
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Start at the definition of Hermes. Yeah, don't hit that
Ah,
mute button.
yeah, I sat on the heat and the mute button. Sorry,
You might want to tape it up somewhere so that doesn't happen.
I remove it from there. So as we saw before when we were talking about Hermes, is that he represents many things together, and we'll see that all of them are related. But these characters, the priests in ancient Egypt, who were the ones that knew how to write the spells, they were the magi, but they were the priests too. And what is interesting about Egypt is that language was something that was very important, and basically it was considered something magical in Egypt to be able to put things into words and scribe, or in this case into pictograms, into the symbols that they used to do, and inscribe them down.
I think they
Because
had an alphabet as well as the pictograms, didn't they?
I don't know, probably you probably know more than I do. I'm a dilettante on that. So so what happened to them, right, is, and it's interesting, and it's literally because when you put things out of you, and you write them down or you carve them in stone, you're transcending death. So a path to immortality for them was to write things down, and in a way it's true, because all these guys are far gone, but we're talking about them today. So they transcended that by creating by projecting themselves outside of themselves into materiality and stone and pyramids and hieroglyphics and all these things, and they transcended that, and their ideas, because they were codified in these symbols, we can share them today, and we can see what they tried to do at the time today. So in a very literal way, they transcended death through language, so they became immortal. Uh, and again, what happened to them is that what they were doing was they didn't have a difference between secular life and religious life, but it was everything was together. We have come to compartmentalize everything in different spaces here, right? So we have teachers and we have politicians and then we have people who do sports and all these different professions and things all over the place. And then we have religion and then magic and all these things. In antiquity, everything was together, and we'll see that how it works later on in the presentation. But it's fascinating because they had a unified theory of everything in their knowledge. So they were very wise. Now let's take a look a little bit on these priests and what they did.
Okay.
Okay, so here are more depictions of the scribes, and in the middle one you can see the guy sitting there, and with his papyrus there. And basically, these guys used to be in the temples, and they used to write the spells. And people used to go to the temple, let's say with an illness, and these guys used to pull out a scroll, and they used to sign the name of the person who had the illness in the scroll and give it to them, and that was supposed to somehow heal the problem that they had. So what they were doing is they were enacting a spell. Literally, they were spelling out what the problem was, right, or the wish of how to solve the problem was. And as you sign it, then what you were doing with the authority, by the authority of the priest, he was conferring the authority and pushing it into the paper or in the papyrus. And what he was doing was he was enacting the spell, and he was enacting the healing of the person or whatever. Uh, yeah.
I do find it irony that it always seems to go back to some ad verecundium fallacy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. It's all, yeah, fallacies. I find them they
Yeah,
go
but
into
yeah, and I should explain that ad verecundium means
mhm,
the appeal to authority fallacy.
authority. Yeah,
Right. So it's always this one guy who thinks he's got all the answers for everything, and he's gonna fix it all by casting his spells.
right. Yeah, basically, and that's usually the case with all fallacies, right? Is what they do is they distract you from the real thing and take you to an emotional place.
Exactly.
So ad hominem, right? It's like, oh, you should be mad of this guy because he's crazy or whatever it is, right?
Hey,
And don't pay.
Jose, I shouldn't listen to you because you have a Spanish accent. You lived in New York and you now are in Brazil. So,
Yeah, that's horrible.
and
So
so now you're going to start developing a Portuguese accent as well. And then therefore, we shouldn't listen to you.
yeah, it's horrible. I went to States to learn English. I didn't learn it. I forgot my Spanish, and now I don't speak anything. So it's horrible, man. Okay,
And now you have to speak Portuguese on top of it.
which is the crappiest of the three languages that I speak. So imagine how it is.
Oh wow.
Pretty bad,
Don't go outside and yell that to the streets.
right? Well, it took me 18 years to speak this thing that I'm calling English, which is not. So let's see.
Oh,
Okay, so going back here, uh, so these were the priests, but they were the magicians too, and they were in charge of the spells, the laws. They practiced the rituals, and they
let's not
created
forget the money.
the talismans. They created the talismans as well.
And let's
So
not forget the money as well.
yeah, we'll see that. And now, what I want to show you is something very interesting, very peculiar, and is our modern priests. And this is shocking because they literally are still dressing in funny costumes as before. And do you remember the definition of magistrate, even in the words, right? And the way
Yeah,
they dress today.
absolutely. It's the magi. It's the priest, the temple priest. He writes down the laws and creates reality, supposedly.
Eh, and he does, right? That the beauty of magic is
Well,
that
he does only as far as people believe his BS.
exactly. But as long as people believe the BS, then he creates reality for people. And that's the whole point, right? That magic is real in the sense that as as people modify their behavior based on beliefs, then what they're doing, these magicians, as they cast a spell, is that they're modifying reality because they're modifying the behavior of others.
And what, for those who are only hearing the audio version, what Jose is showing on the screen here is a British, or several images of British magistrates that look exactly like the ancient Egyptian scribes and temple priests with their, and these British magistrates have their long wigs and their gowns and everything, and it looks identical to the Egyptian stuff, and the same word as well.
Yeah, exactly. So let's take a look at the next thing, and is the temples. So here, what you're looking at is the Temple of Hera, and this is where all these different priests in antiquity used to do their spells and enact their magic and all the things that they used to do, right? Write the laws, all these things. Now, I'm going to show you a sequence of different temples. This is another one, the Temple of Jupiter. And then the next one is pretty interesting because this is the building of the Supreme Court of the United States. So you see these magistrates, these magi, are still in the same temples that people in antiquity used to be. So nothing has changed, and we believe that we live in a
And people
democratic.
still crawl up those steps and bow to these people for their answers, and it's all
Oh,
based on an ad veracundium.
absolutely, and people go to these buildings, and when they look at them, they think that all the statues and the columns and all these things is for decoration only. But it's just like when I look at Mandarin written down, right? I have no idea how to read that thing. It looks like wiggles to me. So I could say that it's for decoration on paper. And I stay at that level. And that's what people do usually when they go to all this architecture, is revealing, is giving you what it means and what is there. But when you don't know how to read it, then it's decoration. It's just wiggles on stone or paper or whatever it is. But it's not that it's that you don't know how to read it. And then the next one here is the Bank of England. Same thing, right? Same style, same architecture, is still the temple. And then finally, just another example, is the building of the Federal Reserve, which is another temple. Which takes us to the other thing, that is the creation of talismans. Now, this is interesting. So here's the definition of a talisman, right? And at the end of the day, it comes from a telesma, which means a payment or a tax from telus. Now that's interesting, right? Because think about what a talisman is. Is a talisman is an object which is consecrated by the authority of a magi or a priest, and then as soon as he does that, it acquires a power that it didn't have before, and it becomes valuable because it has that power. So one of the things that these priests used to do in the temples was the consecration of talismans, and they gave them to people. Now, in the next one here, what we can see is different talismans of different epochs. Now, the first one is interesting because what you see there is Juno Moneta. Now, from that was one of the names of the goddess Juno. And if you remember the first temple that we saw, it was the temple of Hera. Now, Hera and Venus, and Juno, sorry, are the same. One is the Roman and the other one is the Greek. But then Moneta was a name of the goddess. And the word monetary and money comes from moneta directly. So here we see one of the talismans created at the temple, because they had the mint at the temple. One of the functions of the temple was minting the talismans, which are the coins, and they were distributed and they had value. So when you got one of these talismans, they had this spiritual power, this energy on them, and they were charged with that. Now, one of the things that you could do with the talismans, and this is very interesting, this is called a pest thaler, and it's from Bohemia. And if you see it, both sides, right, has Christ on one side, and
Sure.
then and the idea of this talisman was that there was a pest in Bohemia at the time, and this talisman was used to protect people from the pest. Now, what is interesting is the word thaler, because from the word thaler comes the word dollar. So you see, all of us are walking around, all guys around, we're walking around with all these talismans right by our testicles in our pocket. And we're not even aware that they're magical. But if you think about it, it's a pure act of magic, because what is happening is something is being created out of nothing. So the priests take the piece of paper and declare this has value now, and then magically it does, and it does as long as people believe that they do have value, and we all do believe that these things have value. So we're in a deep trance and spell, right? And either anyone who believes that they don't believe that these things have value to go work for 2 days, get a piece of paper or two of $100 or whatever it is that they get, and burn them. You cannot, because we all ascribe value to these things. So you see, we have a talismanic medium of exchange, and it's the foundation of our society. We measure everything in how many talismans or how many units of magic value they have. So it's fascinating because the very foundation of our society is these talismans, and they have value. If you think what they are literally is just pieces of paper with scribbles and symbols on them. By the way, very, very intricate symbols in the case of the dollar, right? And magical symbols. But it's
Indeed.
beautiful.
Did you sit on your microphone again? Hello? Hello?
Hey, I'm back. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah,
Um,
let's keep that out of the way.
yeah. Cool. What was the last thing you said that I said?
Oh, you had said that it's beautiful or something like that. The talisman's on the back of the dollar
Yeah.
bill, and we've got the pyramid and Novus Ordo Seclorum or
Right.
New World Order, and then on the right we have the eagle with the Star of David up above, and then you have the spider's web with the spider and the owl and all the other good stuff in there.
Nice. That's why I stopped reading fiction a long time ago, Jan. It's because reality,
Yeah.
reality is more interesting and more weird than anything that you could ever imagine. So it's great. I adore studying these things and learning. And the sad thing is that what you learn is a sad story, right, of enslavement. But at least when you see it, you can start to wake up and see what's going on, right?
Indeed.
So now, before I introduce the next thing, which is rituals, I want to present a concept, right, from a neuroscientist uh, called Restek, and it's a very complicated way to say something simple, and is this: each thought and behavior is embedded within the circuit of the neurons, and neuronal activity accompanying or initiating an experience persists in the form of reverberating neuronal circuits, which become more strongly defined with repetition. So basically, it's a very complicated way to say you learn through repetition. Now,
And
one
and
thing
your
that is
and your brain is also rewired essentially through that
ah,
repetition.
that's you are what you do and what you listen and what you hear. So in a way, as you're listening to this, you're
See,
becoming this
this
internally.
this right here is where psychedelic drugs can be very important to sever that. However, without a systematic method of critical thinking, this is the exact same spot where someone with ill intentions gets in and inserts their own program.
Exactly. Exactly. Because what we're doing, right, as we walk around, we become our experiences. We wire ourselves through our experiences, and our brain and our bodies become what we do. So if we do sports all day long, we become fit, right? And we play tennis all day long. We every time we play it, we accentuate the circuits that we create to play the tennis, and we play it better. But then our body changes too. What we eat, then the shape of our body is given by what we eat. The thoughts that we get modify our brain. So all the experiences that we embody the experiences. The embodiment of those experiences is what we are. We are our experiences. Now, this in magic, right, is exploited in a very interesting way, and it's rituals. So think about different rituals that we have here. The middle one, do you remember the magistrates, the master degree? Look at the center one. The guy getting the degree with the funny hat and all this stuff. And think about the rituals in general, what they are, right? And what they have. So one thing is solemnity. There is always the sense of authority, right? Something important is happening. They are theatrical. You have all the funny hats and the music and the incense and different
Yeah.
things.
It's
So
an appeal to authority is also always based on a funny Halloween costume.
yeah, it's a gay costume somewhere for some reason. A drag queen parade, right? Eh, oh man, I'm gonna get
Not to
shit out of
offend, not to offend anybody in the audience there.
Yeah, it's just making fun. I don't have anything against that. It's good for you, man. But that's what they do, right? But the point of that is to make it memorable, because what you are trying to do is you're trying to imprint something on your brain. So when something grabs your attention, right? Then what you're doing is you're concentrating on that. You're looking at that. It's
Yeah,
forcing
and
you to
it's
pay attention.
it's like these pickup artists who use, like, this guy that got that was revealed, like they do this peacocking practice to pick up on women and things. These guys that these 40-year-old virgin types.
I never heard that, man.
You've never heard that? Oh,
No.
there's a whole lot of books out there on picking up women and all of this stuff, and these guys are, they're all in this battle. And one guy, I think from Rolling Stone magazine, followed him around for a year or two, and then exposed the whole thing and became the master pickup artist, I guess.
Beautiful. Yeah. So the thing is, and then they have the incense, right? So it's an all body experience. You're immersing yourself into the experience. So you have the chants, so you have the sound that comes to you, and the smell, and the whole thing is a memorable thing. And then certain ones, like you go to mass every Sunday or things like this, then the other thing you're doing is you're repeating them again and again and again and again. So the other thing is you're creating this, you're part of a group, right? So you're increasing your feeling of affiliation. You're feeling special, right? Because you're part of this. uh, and then all this is getting imprinted on you, and all these emotions that you're getting are getting associated with the ritual. Now I want to present another uh, psychological definition, which is the definition of a complex, and is a group of associated ideas having a common, strong emotional tone. These ideas are largely unconscious and significantly influence attitudes and associations. So basically, it's the idea that you're associating things and putting them together, and that's another part of a ritual. Here we can see the ritual of the flag, right? So everybody, since they're 4 years old and they have to go to school, then you have to go there and pray to the flag, right? And
A
the allegiance of
a
the
rag
flag
on a stick. Wow, look at that.
is amazing. But think about this. Like, remember we were talking about the neurons, and when they're developing, and when you're creating all these neuronal pathways, when you're young, that's when it's happening the most.
Sure.
So,
And you
so
notice behind the children, they have these statues and these photos of Washington and Lincoln, et cetera, which, these guys were just the master magi, excuse the double usage there. Uh,
right, the
you know,
master masons, right?
they were the master mind controllers in previous generations, and that's why they're worshipped.
Right, absolutely. And then what you see here, right? What you said, a rag on a stick, right? With
It's a
some
rag
funny,
on a stick. Well, I got that from Michael Parenti, and he's a socialist.
right,
He still believes in the authority of government, which is
right.
absurd. But yeah, he's got some. You can filter through his garbage and get some
Yeah,
nuggets.
no, he's a smart guy. I heard him many times, and he has a lot of good things to say. But yeah, but think about what you're doing, right? So what you're associating is to this symbol, you're you're attaching your emotions to this symbol. So when you're a kid and you're in school and you're with all your friends and you feel special because you feel that you're part of the group and you live all these experiences with them together and all these things. And then what you're doing is every time you see the flag, what you're doing is all those things that you attach to them, all these complex that you created, you're bringing them back into your memory, into your field of consciousness. So what you're doing is you're projecting the energy of your emotions, right, into this symbol. So this symbol is becoming those emotions because you're evoking those emotions every time you see the symbol, which takes us to the next topic that I want to talk about, which is the summoning of elementals. Now, let's start by looking at what the elementals are, right? So, what is an elemental? An elemental is, this is the definition, pertaining to the elements and produced by some of the four supposed elements as elemental war, produced by elements and elemental strife arising from first principles. Now, let's look a little bit about the history of elements in antiquity and how it worked. So basically, since the time of the Greeks, people believed that the world was composed out of four elements, which were water, air, earth, and fire. And then you see them up there, right? So the first one in the first quadrant is water, then the second one is air, then the third one is earth, and then at the bottom one, the bottom right corner is fire. And then what you see, the different triangles there are the different symbols for the different elements. And then the idea was that reality, right, was created and composed out of these four elements. Just like what we think today, right? That we have atoms and then molecules, and all reality is just the combination of these molecules and arrangements of these atoms in different ways, which creates reality. So since antiquity, people believe that these were the four elements that compose everything, and there are different modifications of these. They in different cultures, right? Like the Chinese had wood as one of the elements, and then in other parts we have five elements, right? And there were five elements too, and the fifth one was called the quintessence, the fifth essence, quint from five, and essence essential, and it was to be the spirit or supposed to be the spirit. So in reality, the world was composed by five elements: the four that we see here, plus a spirit. And I think in the last presentation that we did, we saw the cross, right? So in the cross, what you have in each of the tips of the cross, of the four tips, you have one of the four elements, and then crucified, you have the fifth, which is Christ,
Well,
which is
in
the
fact,
spirit.
the four are represented by the ox, the what are the four animals and man that are all there? The ox, the eagle, the man, and then one other are represented there in the cross, which are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Right.
As right,
It's the eagle, the angel, the ox, and the lion.
thank you, the lion.
Yeah, those are the four.
Yep, and those directly correlate to these and alchemy and etc.
Right. So now this is the interesting thing, and this is fascinating because remember we're talking that in antiquity the physical manifestation of the world and the theory that they have to express that was the same theory that they had to express emotions and express astrology and astronomy, and everything was explained by one theory. We have compartmentalized that, right? And today we don't have a theory to explain in terms of molecules what love is, for example, or something crazy like that, right? But these guys in antiquity, they did because they had one big theory for everything. And one of the maxims of antiquity and the first of the hermetical maxims is as above, so below. So basically, everything is related to everything else, and the laws that you apply to what is outside are the same laws that apply to what is inside. Now, what you're looking here is the crest, this image, right, is what is used, is a medieval image, and is what is used by the Warburg Institute, which was founded by Avi Warburg. And we can talk about that later on, or research it on your own, guys, because otherwise this becomes too long.
Right.
But basically, he was the brother of Max and Paul Warburg. Paul Warburg, the founder of the Federal Reserve, Max Warburg, the banker of the Kaiser during World War One, and he was an alchemist and a magician, and he studied all these things 2 centuries ago. And in order to study this in a century ago, you had to be a millionaire and a member of the biggest banking
Well,
families in the world.
like what's her name? That the founder of Theosophy. Oh, geez, her name just skipped my mind. Not Besant, the other one, the famous woman,
Blavatsky,
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 of course, and she was Russian intelligentsia. So there you have it.
right? But my point here was that a century ago, in order to study all these symbols and all this, you had to have a lot of money to get access to all the
Absolutely.
libraries and museums and all these collections around the world. Today, a poor schmuck like me with a computer can do this on the internet, right? So that's the beauty of this.
And just so people know, we do have about 7 or 8 entries in the brain database on the Warburg family for those who would like to investigate their background.
Cool. So coming back to the topic, so we're saying that they had this symbol was chosen in particular by Abraham Warburg because it's a very succinct way to show the unification of knowledge. So what you have is you have 3 circles, one inside the other, and what he's relating is the inner world, the outer world, and time. So what you have here is the 4 elements that we see: ignis, terra, aqua, and air on the outer ring, right? And then the other two that you have is one is the 4 humors, which are choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic, and melancholic, and we'll go into that in a moment. And then the 4 seasons, so you have summer, spring, winter, and autumn. So what you see is you have one theory of everything where you're relating everything together, and then in the center what you have is it says mundus annus homo.
Yep.
So it's the world,
Earth.
the year,
Yep. And man.
and man, right? So it's a unification of everything together. Now, let's look at the next one. And again, it's the same idea. The idea was that the psyche was created out of these 4 elemental forces, which were the phlegmatic, the sanguine, the melancholic, and the choleric. Water to phlegmatic, air to sanguine, earth to melancholy, and fire to choleric. And each of these had different aspects, and we can see how it works, right? So what they did is each of these elemental forces drove or different behaviors of people. And what is interesting is that they did these studies. This is fascinating. This is from a guy called Raymond Lull from the 1200s. And what they did is they created all these systematic studies of emotions and the interactions of them. So this guy created the first systematic study of something. And the first thing that was studied systematically, he created all these trees of, okay, what happens when you are angry and do this, and he cataloged all different emotions of people, and he created page after page after page of all these trees where all the emotions and all the different scenes and the virtues and all these things are related to each other.
And for
And
those who are paying close attention, the top left one you'll notice matches exactly the Kabbalah.
yeah, because it's a codification of the same thing, right? It's maps of the
Sure.
psyche.
And you know, the tree of Jesse in Christianity, which is essentially this here, is also the Kabbalah, and then there's that repeated theme as well, and much of the symbolism.
Yeah, absolutely. What you're doing is you're creating a map of consciousness. So in these occult sciences, what they were doing, right, is they were studying how the mind works.
And how they could
And
control everybody, folks.
exactly. So here we go to another concept that is operant conditioning, and is a process of behavior modification in which a subject is encouraged to behave in a desired manner to positive or negative reinforcement so that the
Thanks,
subject
thanks to B.F. Skinner.
yeah exactly, but he just created the term for it, right? But as you see around, it's just punishment and rewards to modify behavior.
Well, sure, you know,
But look at the
interestingly, and let me just interrupt you again because this is important for all of the mind control stuff that I've been exposing lately. Is B.F. Skinner, the guy who created operant conditioning or the word and created the Skinner box, also worked at the Esalen Institute with Michael Murphy and Dick Price and Aldous Huxley and all of these guys helping dispensate these mind control systems. So here you go, folks.
absolutely, but this is something that is comes from antiquity, right? These guys have been inheriting this system of how the mind works and this knowledge, right? And expressing it in different ways. Now it's psychology, before it was alchemy and magic and all these different occult arts. But you see here the two images, right? It's the dichotomy that you see in churches in many places where you have heaven and hell, right? Punishment and rewards. And now with all this knowledge that, or all these concepts that I have presented here, I want to show you how it works, and a simple one, right? So let's take one of the elementals, or one of the elemental forces that we have, right? Or the which is lust. And then what you do, right, is okay, so how do we do this? Very simply, right? What we do is we associate a product with lust. So what we're doing is we're creating this association of concepts, this complex, where what you have is every time you see the beer, then in your subconscious, you're tying that with sex, right? And then both become together, right? And then this is used everywhere in advertisement. Uh, Here is the master of black magic, right? And of the elemental forces,
Is that
which
Edward
is
Bernays?
is fear, right? So that's the point, or what is used to control people. The most effective way to control people is through fear. And this is what is exploded by the black magicians everywhere. So let's take a look at examples. This is very interesting. This is a anti-smoking campaign of here in Brazil, right? So every pack of cigarettes that you buy here comes with one of these grotesque images on the back. But it's very vulgar. You see, it's grotesque. And what they're doing, right, is they're associating this idea of fear to cigarettes, and it's very effective.
And you know what though, the irony here that they don't want people to know is that it's all of the ammonia and the chemicals and things that they put in the cigarettes that make it so bad. And when you go through these whole leaf brokers, you don't even pay a tax on the tobacco, and the tobacco companies never even get their hands on it. It goes from the farmer to the broker right to you, and the taxes and all the chemicals and all of the stuff are removed. And one thing that I find interesting trying this whole leaf tobacco is that there wasn't even any coughing And so they've, just like everything else with the GMO foods and you
The
name it,
pesticides.
the pesticides and everything else that they've done, they've targeted tobacco, I think, as an intentional death machine. And of course, whenever you advertise tobacco in any way, it's even the negative quitting aspects, it's always going to increase the usage. It's just like the war on drugs program increased drug use in the United States by like 900 fold.
Right. So because you see, this goes both ways, right? So every time you feel fear or danger, you are anxious, right? The association goes both ways, right? So when you see a cigarette, you get the association of all these images, right? But when you feel anxious for something or you feel fear, what is your thing in the complex? The tobacco. So if you feel anxious, then it brings into your subconscious the idea of tobacco or cigarettes. So it goes both ways. Now let's
So
take a look at that.
what you're saying in that last one is simultaneously, whenever you feel anxious or that fear, it ties it to the cigarettes to make you want it, even though it associates it simultaneously with death. So that's the trick that they do there.
Absolutely. Here is another one, right? Like predators. So for millions of years, people live in the jungle and they were scared of these nightly beasts that came, right, to hunt you. Now, this has been exploited, and this is very interesting, right? Like in the church, right? So you have all the demons, and look at the features of the demons. They look like beasts, because that is whenever you present those attributes, right? You're bringing this elemental aspect of our consciousness. That is, we're afraid of these animals because for years they hunt us. They hunted us, right? So you can very easily associate these two things, right? So the devil and all these things with the the big teeth and all this. And now look at this propaganda from war propaganda. Look at the features that characterize
Yeah,
the enemy. It's the
Japan is
same
a
things.
gorilla.
Yeah,
Interesting.
look at like the Germans there, right? Like the Japanese. So, but look, it's the same features because what
Right.
it's doing is tapping into fear through these features that are subconscious because it's something that we have wired for millions of years. Same thing here. Look at this. This is an interesting one. Uh, Again, the idea of the devil, and look at this. The first one is war propaganda from World War II, right? German. And then look at the next one, the time cover. It's the same image. It's exactly the same archetype. And then the last one, at Mahinajat, right? So what you're doing is you're reusing these ideas all the time to modify and control behavior. What you're doing is you're evoking or controlling the elemental forces through associations. Same thing. Look at this is the fear of death and the fear of death of children in particular, right? Like this is a medieval image. And look at all these posters, war posters, right, from World War II. Same thing. And everybody uses this. It's not only the evil Americans, right, but it's the Japanese and the Germans, and everybody uses the same to to force people to march into war, to awake all these internal elemental forces that we have to modify our behavior and make us act. Mm, and then
Sorry,
again,
and
yeah,
then what is the purpose of war but to put thousands or millions of young men in ditches to kill each other off? It's just eugenics, population control.
and a lot of it's a big business for
Well,
weapon
well,
manufacturers.
sure, but the whole point is those people make money off of the murder and the population control
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's a win-win for them, right?
for the elites, right? And a lose
Exactly,
lose for everybody, for the rest of humanity.
right. For the rest of us who put our childrens to go to these things because we're manipulated by these images, right?
Yep.
To stop thinking and to look at reality for what it is and go and put our emotions first. And then I have a bunch here that are very interesting, right? Like this is the idea of the father, right? The figure of authority of the father of holiness and so on. Look
And
at all these
the kind
images.
open hands and yeah.
Exactly. And then take a look at this, right? It's propaganda. It's always the same thing. It's the elementals. It's the values of the family. You're born, you have a father and a mother. You grew up with them, right? The predators. It's always the same. Look at this. The idea of the authority of the father,
Right.
and then it's the same. And this one is my favorite one, right? Like the benevolent, the father, the teacher. Look at these images. Look at it's a stage. It cannot be a coincidence that
Oh
these two
yeah,
images are the same.
yeah. Of course. Oh wow, look at that. Yeah, I know. Obama loves to try and dress himself up as a good Christian guy there to save the day. Wow, those are amazing. Great finds.
Is and then you start seeing this for what it is, right? Is you see everybody does the same. You have there Stalin, right? Bush, everybody is because these are well-known techniques that are exploited by the people that know this. Same thing here, right? Like name your favorite politician hugging and holding kids, right? And the
Sure.
benevolent father happens all the time.
Yep.
And again, the idea of the Madonna, right? And how it can be exploited. Look at these posters from war propaganda again, right?
Yeah.
So what you're taking is you're creating fear and you're corrupting and creating fear against what is sacred, which is your family, right? Like the idea of holding a baby and you're destroying it and you're saying, if you don't act in this way, then this is what's going to happen. And you're evoking the elemental forces. So you're summoning elemental spirits by doing this. It's a magical act where you're modifying the behavior of people. Same thing here with the family, right? And it goes on and on and on. But that's the idea is what you're doing is you're tapping into these elemental forces to modify the behavior of people. So you're controlling elementals. And that's what it is. Now, to me, this is the most interesting one is the conjuration of supernatural entities. And let's see. So in magic, right? If you get the lore of what it is oh, a magician gets and makes all these weird spells, and then he can conjure a demon,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah, which is the exact opposite of how it actually works.
Right. So let's go to some definitions. And to me, this is the most important definition in the whole presentation,
All
and
right.
is the idea of supernatural. So the definition of supernatural, right? So first thing that we think when we think about supernatural is oh, ghosts, right? Or demons or all these things. But let's go and read what it says in the dictionary, right? Is supernatural comes from super natura, above nature. So being beyond or exceeding the powers of nature, not occurring through the operation of merely physical laws, but by an agency above and separate from this, right? So, something that is supernatural is something that is not ruled by the laws of nature. That's it, that's the definition. And we'll see how it plays beautifully. So, let's look at how it works. So when you're conjuring all these supernatural entities, right? So the first thing in the lore is that what they have is these sigils, which are these basically these signs or these signatures that have the power through ritual to evoke the entity that you want, to cast the entity that you want. So you're summoning these signs are used to summon the entity, the supernatural entity that you want to bring into materiality.
So a corporate seal.
We'll see that in a moment. Now, the next one is a conjurer, right? So a conjure is a piece of paper, right? It comes from conjurare, which is to swear together. And this is like when people sell their soul to the devil, right? Like so they write a spell and they sign it. right? And then they create this. They're doing this conjure, right? Like they're evoking this entity through the creation of the spell, right? Through the conjure. And then this is an interesting thing: is incorporatio or incorporation, which is the act of placing in a body or giving material form, incarnation, or embodiment. And what I'm going to show you is a modern conjure of incorporation. So this is a title of incorporation, right, of a supernatural entity. And let's think about it. What you were saying before, right? So we have the sigils
The
that evoke
signs.
the supernatural entity. Now, let's think about what is a supernatural entity. Is something that is created or is ruled by something that are not the laws of nature. Well, what other laws do we have that are not the laws of nature? The laws of man, the legislation created by the priests. So something supernatural, literally by definition, is something that is ruled by human laws or laws that are
Legislate,
outside of natural law.
legislate created by the magistrate.
Exactly. So the magi create the magical laws, right? Which is, I don't know, the constitution or any of these things that they do, and the laws, right, and the edicts and all this, and anything that is ruled by that is supernatural. And then when you, by a magical act, what you did is you created an entity that didn't exist before by doing this conjure, right? So you conjured this supernatural entity that is the corporation. So you incorporated, you gave life to this creature that didn't exist before and exists in a different dimension. Think about a corporation. Where is it? It's not out of these three dimensions that we have. It lives in the psyche of people.
As
So
does
it's a
government
absolutely.
and
So
religion.
that's the biggest of them all, right? So here is the biggest of all these conjuration is the Leviathan, right? The biblical figure of Leviathan. And now, if you look, this is the cover, right? The first page of the Leviathan of Hobbes, right? Where basically what he does, right, is he gives a prescription of or a recommendation on how to create a sustainable and long-term state based on fear. So what he identifies in the Leviathan as the driving force of humanity is fear, and what he says is how you have to use this to create the state around it. Now, this is the biggest of all these magical incorporation acts, right? You're summoning a state here, and think about how it happens, right? You get all these people who feel that they're important and have authority, and they put together a paper and say, from now on, this is a country, right? And we have these imaginary lines here. So what they did is they created this supernatural entity out of nothing through a ritual. That's magic.
The
And then,
Federalists versus the Anti Federalists, indeed. And I'm going to
and then,
hopefully have someone on who exposes all of that soon.
and then all the signs and flags and the eagle and all the sigils that evoke this creature. So if you see the creation of the Leviathan is exactly that. What you're doing is you're conjuring into existence this supernatural entity that rules over us. You conjure a demon, the Leviathan, by doing that. And it's magical. It's, if you think about it, it's just ritualistic and magic. And it's
Absolutely.
the foundation of our society. So I find this poster on the internet. I find it very very interesting, which because it's exactly that. You see, the state doesn't exist everywhere, anywhere, but in the heads of people. And as long as we believe in the authority that created this state and that it exists, then we're gonna change our behavior, and then it is gonna exist. And then,
And this is exactly, and you're probably going to get to this as well. This is exactly how the gods and the various religious books were created as well. They're just written down, and then you create a statue or whatever instead of a a seal, and the god is created into existence.
absolutely. And just to start to wrap at here, right? Like this, the second to last image. This is very shocking, right? So this is the preparation for selection of on the ramp of the Auschwitz Birkenau camp. Now look at this picture and detail it, right? Look at how many guards we have in this picture,
Four.
and look at how many Jews we have in the picture, thousands, right? So it's not brute force what is holding all these people in line. It's a spell. It's the fear. It's magic. Because you see, you cannot maintain, very few people cannot control the rest through brute force. Because it's impossible. Because you outnumber them. But enslavement, right? And the believing that you have to constrain yourself and follow their authority has to be in you. Enslavement, slavery is in your head. It's not out there. It's you. And that's the bottom line of this, right? And this is the last image that I want to show to wrap up, right? So this is a Albert Durer image of Hermes again, and all these Greek words there are all the attributes of Hermes. And look at how he has in chains from his tongue all the members of society, right?
Hey, look at that! It's the Pied Piper.
Yeah. So you see, we live in a deep trance, all of us, and we can help it because to be human is to have imagination, right? To be able to form symbols to express concepts, right? To express concepts or to codify and create symbols. So, but that is not good or evil. It simply is our nature, but it can be exploited. So as soon as we're able to confuse our concepts and what is out there with creatures that we create and bring into our psyche, as soon as we do that, we have thieves, right? Because then you can start playing games and tricks with the mind of people. So that's why Hermes was the god of the thieves as well, right? Because he was language, but with language comes the ability to lie. Is
Right.
part of language. So if you exploit that, you can deceive people into doing different things. So
And then
just
the and then
yeah,
as then we go actually back from this, but Demosthenes and the worship of 322 by Skull and Bones. Demosthenes was the sophist who created many of the techniques that are used today by groups like Skull and Bones, etc., for these types of mind control.
yeah. This is ancient knowledge. This has been around for a long, long time, and our nature, which is all these spirits, all these gods that we have inside, right? Which are our emotions and our passions. They're constant, and throughout generations they keep the same. They're immortal. They're always there, and whoever knows how to, whoever has this knowledge, there are two aspects, right? One is you can use them to control people and exploit people, or you can use them for to know yourself, to become a real philosopher, right? uh, Now the other thing, and this is interesting, is that magic is used to protect itself in this way, right? Like when you think about black magic and you think about demons and all these things, the first thing that comes to your head is this idea of these scary creatures that are going to come and kill you or whatever it is that they're going to do. But you see how they're creating this cocoon of fear around the subject, the very subject of magic and the occult and all these things, so people don't study them because they fear them. And this works as long as people don't know how it works. Because once you know that the hat of the magician has a hole, then the spell collapses. So I think that's my presentation, Jan.
Jose, fantastic job today. I really appreciate you taking the time for this. Why don't we switch you back to video mode here so we can see your face?
Okay, let me try to do that. That's an act of magic.
Well, the famous question, what is the single most important concept that you would like people to take away from this interview?
Uh, think about what supernatural means, right? And the other thing is images blind people. When you read a book, you create all these images about what the book means, and it's very rich. When you go and watch the movie, you lost your ability to imagine something different because now those images, right, are what it is. So I think the same thing happens with all these things. Right? Imagine a fundamentalist Christian who believes that the world was made in 6 days because he took that literally, and think about Dawkins, right, the evolutionist guy who is taking that literally and is denying it. So what he says is, no, the world was not created in 6 days, therefore that's false, therefore the whole thing is stupid, and stop thinking about it, right, and move on. If you think about it, those two guys are exactly at the same level of mind, at the same level of consciousness, because they're reading things as kids and they're staying with the image of Santa Claus, right? And they're staying at the first layer of the onion, and they're not denying they're at the same level of consciousness because they're taking things literally and they're not thinking about the deep significance of things. So same thing with magic. When you look at magic and you think about the magician and the demons and all this, you stay there. And that happens everywhere because images are very powerful. So once you associate an image with something, that prevents you from going ahead and looking beyond that. So question everything and look at everything and don't put your emotions on it. Just look at it coldly and see how you're being manipulated. That's it.
Put your grammar before your logic.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much, Jose. And we'll wrap it up right there.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.